All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, again, welcome. My name is Tony Flach with the Leadership and Learning Center. Thank you for joining us today for our professional learning event. We are here today to share some ideas, tips, and research from the field on how to achieve immediate gains in priority and focus schools. A couple of quick notes about upcoming events. Should anything that you hear today pique some interest that you'd like to find some more about, we have two upcoming Common Core State Standards Summits getting ready for the next generation assessments. You see the dates there on the screen. They are in Denver, Colorado, September 17th and 18th, and in New Orleans, Louisiana, November 5th and 6th. If you'd like to find out more about some of the topics that we discussed today on this webinar, we will be hosting two 90-90-90 School Improvement Summits, again in Chicago, September 24th and 25th, and then in Las Vegas, Nevada, on the 13th and 14th. Special note about the event in Las Vegas, we'll be featuring Dr. Mike Schmoker, the author of the best-selling book, Focus, Elevating the Essentials to Radically Improve Student Achievement, and Paul Tuff, that you may know from his book, It's Being Done, and his most recent publication, How Children Succeed, Grit, Curiosity, and the Hidden Power of Character. Those two well-noted researchers and authors will be joining us in November in Las Vegas. So please feel free to follow up with us on any additional information if you'd like to find out more. With us today, myself again, Tony Flach. I am a professional development associate at the center. I had the privilege of working with the organization for 12 years now. Joining me today is Lissa Pijanowski. Dr. Pijanowski is the National Director of School Improvement Partnerships for the Leadership and Learning Center. And prior to joining us, she has held positions everything from Associate Superintendent, Classroom Teacher, up to and including the Director of School Improvement for the State Department of Education in Georgia. Also with us today, but kind of behind the scenes like the Wizard of Oz, is Kathy Shulkin in our Boston office. Kathy helps coordinate these events and make sure that things go smoothly and your questions get directed to the appropriate location. So thank you very much for joining us all today, Kathy. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do, we have had the privilege of working alongside many of your colleagues out in the field, and we've received a lot of questions about how schools get better. So we have a series of questions throughout the day that we will address, and certainly welcome your questions as they pertain to what we're talking about here. If you have any questions that come to mind and you'd like for us to address, please don't hesitate again to use that question feature and send them in. Going to turn it over to Lissa now with first two questions from the field. Lissa, good morning.
Good morning, Tony.
First, wanted to start off with your experience in the field, both in the state of Georgia as well as nationally since joining the center. Can you share some insights into the current status of accountability in the United States? A lot of our clients are confused by the shifting requirements of various state and federal mandates, and what are we facing in terms of need for our schools?
Absolutely, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share. Certainly, we are facing some big changes in terms of accountability across the United States. And as you all know, we're moving from No Child Left Behind, where in 2014, all students were to be considered proficient. And now we had the opportunity under this administration for states to apply for ESEA flexibility, where the focus really is more on student growth of all students rather than that 100% proficiency in 2014. Now with that comes a movement from needs improvement schools to now identifying schools that they consider focus or priority schools. Currently you'll see the map in front of you that shows that all of the states that are in blue currently have approved flexibility waivers, and those that are in green are in the process of states or areas that are currently approved for these waivers. Now, what this means in terms of that current reality is that right now we have over 6,380 priority and focus schools identified across the state. Now that probably leaves a little frog in your throat, like it does for me as well. There's a huge burden across our states to really roll up our sleeves and focus our improvement efforts as never before. So state to state, every plan is a little bit different, but it is a requirement that each state identify of their Title I schools, 5% of those as priority and 10% as focus. And with that comes some pretty hefty requirements in terms of. So all schools now have to identify and create intervention plans aligned with the turnaround principles, as you see outlined on your screen, as well as if schools actually received a school improvement grant, they also have to address either one of the 4 models, either turnaround, restart, school closure, or transformation, as well as the 8 essential elements. A lot of sense of urgency that folks feel about needing to improve, managing all of these requirements while focusing efforts is a huge need. And so what we have really done at the center, and we continue to promote, is really trying to get districts and schools to focus in on the one big thing, which is, you know, from Jim Collins' Good to Great, that one big thing, the hedgehog concept, it has to be, for us, student learning. And so how do we take all these external factors and really pull together a healthy sense of urgency that really does help us focus our efforts? So Tony, that's really where we are today in terms of that the focus of the work, and really want to share some of those foundational practices. And I know we wanted to see who actually was with us so that we could focus our conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Lissa. So what we'd like to do, folks, is if you would take a few minutes and respond to our first poll question here, we'd like to find out who we have in the audience with us today. Are you a district level leader, central office supervisor, curriculum coordinator, etc.? Do you serve at a school level in a leadership position? Are you a teacher or instructional coach at a school in your district, or are you an external service provider such as a regional service agency or center or State Department of Education employee, or potentially college or higher ed group that is working with schools and supporting their school improvement efforts? So please take a moment, respond to that poll. Kathy will let us know how the responses are coming, who we have in the audience.
Okay, we're looking good. We'll give you another 5 seconds here in order to respond so we can take a look.
And again, please, folks, don't hesitate. Excellent. So let's predominantly, we have a lot of folks from external agencies, school leadership next, as we might expect, and then district level leadership. So folks, please don't hesitate. We'll gear our responses to those levels, but please do not hesitate to send in your specific questions as we go throughout the rest of our session. So, Lissa, that leads us to the next questions that we've gotten from the field, set of questions related to the research. I don't know about you, but I often get confused because there's so much research out there, and there's often contradictory findings from that research about what it is that schools do to get better. And so 2 of the most pressing questions here that we've gotten frequently are, you know, what is the research that should guide or focus our school improvement efforts? And is there a set of proven practices that will help schools get better? What are your thoughts? What have you heard about that?
Well, that's a great question. I have people ask me that all the time. You know, we're oftentimes inundated with the need to have research-based practices, but there's so much out there. How do you actually know what's most effective? Well, foundational to our improvement efforts at the center is the 90-90-90 research by Dr. Douglas Reeves. Many years ago, there was a study of schools that had 90% or better students of minority, 90% or better students that are of poverty, and those students were still 90% or better proficient or higher on a state exam. And so of that, you know, of that study, we really wanted to look at what were the characteristics of those high achieving schools. And to be quite honest with you, Tony, you know this as well, the laser-like focus on student achievement down to the student name, their needs, was critical, not too dissimilar from what our requirements are for RTI now. And of course, clear curriculum choices, knowing what those learning priorities are, and those being the things that guide our frequent assessments, those formative assessments. We can't wait till the end of the year when the state assessments come out. That becomes an autopsy report. We need to know during the learning process how students are progressing and give them multiple opportunities to improve. And finally, you know, emphasis on nonfiction writing is critical. We know this now more than ever because of the shift to the ELA Common Core and the emphasis on nonfiction reading and writing. as well as making sure that all of your professionals have a common understanding about what proficiency is. And that really comes from collaboratively scoring and looking at student work samples so that you have a guaranteed and viable curriculum where all the professionals within the school understand what is proficiency. And this, in addition, oh yes.
Sorry, but before we go on and start to talk about some specific practices, I'm intrigued by two things that you've shared there. One, when I'm working in the field, as folks, as so many of our states here are transitioning to Common Core, they're really struggling with how to make sense of these new standards. And so could you talk a little bit about prioritization, just real quick? Is it possible to prioritize the Common Core, and what are some of the criteria that folks are using when they do that?
Absolutely. It's not even possible. It's an imperative. We see teachers all the time in the field that are so overwhelmed, and when they try to cover standards rather than focusing on the learning mastery of the standards, we find that not only are the teachers stressed because they have these really unrealistic expectations to be able to cover all these standards, but we're finding that students are not actually attaining the standard. So it's an imperative that we prioritize. I'll give you an example. Grade 3 Common Core Reading ELA standards, there are 91 standards in 3rd grade. And we know how critical it is for children to be able to learn to read by 3rd grade. No teacher can teach 91 different standards at the same level and at the same rate. So all standards are not created equal. We know that there are some of those standards that are absolutely learning essentials for students, and identifying those really do help schools create very clear curriculum choices, and then that guides the emphasis of the data teams and the assessments as well, because we can't do it all, but coming to consensus about what's essential is absolutely critical.
Excellent. So now what does this look like? So these are the characteristics of what we found to be high-achieving schools. What does this look like in actual practice?
So, one of the things that's really, these are the 90-90-90 characteristics. And what we had to do was we really thought, this is one piece. Let's look at the other pieces of research that really do embody effective school practices. And so what we did, Tony, to really illustrate what it looks like in practice, is we actually identified 3 different groups. And we have identified 9 foundational practices within the categories of accountability, classroom, and school. And so, we think it's really important that to be able to provide that clarity so that folks can actually respond, we needed to have standards, if you will, performance standards for schools, so that it's very clear that if we address these 9 things, we will see dramatic results. So I'll give you some examples. And you know as well as I do, the data teams is absolutely critical. So there are data teams at the building level that work towards school improvement planning, implementation, and monitoring of the foundational practices. And the research that we've done at the Center around planning, implementation, and monitoring is huge. We know that school improvement plans that are beyond 3 goals and 4 to 5 action steps are unrealistic. They will not provide the focus that schools need to make the improvements that are truly needed. And you and I have both reviewed hundreds of school improvement plans that can be voluminous and really cause schools to be splintered and fragmented. So that's one of the accountability practices, along with the instructional data teams, where teams of teachers are empowered to look at those priority learning standards and develop those assessments, come together as a team, come to consensus on instructional practices, and really implement with true purpose and being very intentional about their work. And I know you've seen the results of that as well.
Yeah, and it strikes me, Lissa, that as you're describing these accountability practices, 2 thoughts come to mind. First, this is the opposite of gotcha as it's practiced in many of our states right now. Like you said, waiting for the summative test at the end of the year is a lot like an autopsy. But it also is really consistent with some research that I just revisited from Leithwood and Seashore Lewis about links to leadership. that talk about what it is that effective school leaders do. And you've got two of the big pieces here. They monitor student achievement, and they distribute leadership among teachers and other stakeholders in the building to make shared decisions. So I'm kind of excited about that alignment of practice.
Right. Well, absolutely. And you'll see there's a note at the bottom that within all of our accountability practices, you can't separate school leadership as something in addition to. School leadership has such an impact on student achievement and professional practice in a building that we actually have embedded school leadership standards within all of the practices. And I'll illustrate that even a little bit further. But you're right, there is a big piece to leadership. The next portion of our practices is, as you all know, really focusing on the teaching and learning is where we really need to put most of our effort. And the standards-based curriculum with the movement to the Common Core, again, those prioritized learning goals, making sure that teachers have the curriculum documents that support the priorities is critical. And I find that research-based instruction, while we've had RTI for a while and we've talked a lot about research-based and evidence-based instruction, oftentimes teachers' toolboxes are not as full as we would like. And really collaborating and making sure that teachers have the right tools to be able to differentiate instruction adequately is a big part of our classroom practices. Additionally, the formative assessment measures, this goes far beyond, especially with PARC and Smarter Balance coming on board. This goes far beyond the multiple choice, the quick assessment. We really do need to get assessments of constructed response. We need to find out how students are actually attaining some higher levels of learning, and that is done through formative tasks and assessments that do ask for students to respond in an open-ended fashion, and you really glean a lot of information about how students are attaining the concepts that way. And of course, one of the foundational pieces at the center has always been around literacy. Now with Common Core and the promotion of literacy across the content areas in 612 in particular, we know that for college and career readiness, literacy is critical, not just for being able to read and write, but also to think and learn. And so these classroom practices we thought are pretty foundational and certainly represent years and years of research.
Yeah, again, I've got to just give a shout out here to some of the schools with whom we've had the privilege of working. Group of schools in Frederick County, Maryland, and a school out in western North Carolina in Hendersonville. You see these things in place in their classrooms, and that, especially that last piece that you mentioned there, Lissa, about writing as a thinking and a learning strategy, and what these teachers have found, which I think is consistent with what you're talking about, is that it's a great assessment strategy as well, because they really get a window into their students' thought processes so they can do some real error analysis and make better instructional decisions in response to what they find.
Absolutely, absolutely. And teachers are hungry for this. They want to be better teachers and be more effective and efficient, and when given these strategies, they are off and running. And then our final practices are around just the school as a whole. And, we can never underestimate how schools create that culture of success. And, you learn a lot about a school by being in there. And we know that building that collective responsibility about the student growth and achievement of all students is critical. And students need to know that they are in a safe place, that we believe in them, that we have support systems that will allow them to grow, and that, again, never can be underestimated. And when we have gone out and done work in the field, oftentimes we know we have to address these school culture and learning environment issues before we can actually get to some of the classroom practice, because you have to stabilize the environment and get it focused on the right work before you can actually get down to making some transformational changes. Professional learning is certainly it's our key. We see a lot of schools, as you do too, that buy a lot of stuff, and there is nothing greater than the investment in our people, and that will only happen through professional development that is focused on the improvement goals that have been set forth in school, and it will actually in turn help them with the next day's instruction. So really focused professional development, best investment you can make. And of course, involving the community, not just our parents and our community members, but really involving our students in taking ownership of their own learning, as well as their own school community through service learning and so many other areas. That really builds a stronger community and higher expectations for all students. So again, there's school leadership embedded within all of these, but those were really the big school practices that came forth in our research findings.
And I just recently reviewed another study from the Wallace Foundation that talked about the 5 most important things that principals can do, and there's 3 of the 5 right there. You know, they talk about one of the most effective actions a principal can take is to create that true culture and environment of learning, such that everybody, their teachers, their students are learning about what's going on, about being the lead learner in the building, and about developing partnerships outside of the school to support what's going on. Lissa, I got to tell you, I mean, this is just all really exciting stuff to me, but my big question here, and the question many of our clients are facing, you know, is where do you start? You know, so I'd like to ask the audience real quick in a poll question, you know, which of these 3 big areas represent your greatest need? I want to see what y'all feel out there in the field and compare that against what we're seeing. So if you'll take a moment, folks, and please check one of the 3 accountability practices that Lissa described. Again, those 2 were planning, implementation, and monitoring and building data teams, decision making for results and instructional data teams. Classroom practices were standards-based curriculum and research-based instruction, formative assessment practices, and literacy across the content areas. And then our school-based practices were the environment and school culture, professional learning, student, parent, and community engagement. Kathy, how are we doing on responses?
We're doing well, and I do believe in this one that multiple responses are accepted. Is that correct, Lissa? I think so.
That is correct. That is
okay.
correct. If you find that you have priority needs in multiple areas, please feel free to choose those. And it's asked, you know, how do you know where to start? You know, one thing that's really critical is doing a comprehensive needs assessment. You know, we don't want to jump into something without really knowing where are our opportunities for growth. And, you know, we also advocate that a comprehensive needs assessment needs to not just be around data. Granted, your student performance data is one piece. You need to get into classrooms and observe, see what's happening based on these practices. Are you seeing these in practice? You need to actually look at, you know, interviewing key staff members, community members. Interview your kids. Your students will tell you more about what's happening in your school than anything else. And then, you know, pulling all of those pieces together is really critical, and triangulating the data to get a true picture, and that will drive your focus.
Okay, looks good. I'm going to close the poll, and I'm going to share the results right now.
Great.
Classroom practices, yeah, you know, I think that's in large part reflecting what we see in the field as well. We need to shift what's going on in the classroom to represent this challenge that we're facing with new standards and new assessments. Even in the states that haven't adopted the Common Core, they're making some pretty significant overhauls. Lissa, what do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. And schools can't focus on all 9, especially schools that are struggling and in high need. So really doing exercises like this and the comprehensive needs assessment I mentioned earlier really help you hone in on the areas that you can address first. So this is great information.
Well, and that leads to our next set of questions that we've gotten from the field, actually. And so, you know, I see all these 9 areas of practice, and there's a lot under each of those. And so should we try to do all 9 of those at once, or is it necessary that we have a laser-like focus even on those things that we're trying to shift and change? And and what can our schools do to help focus their efforts and make them more efficient, more effective?
Well, absolutely. You can't do it all. And I kind of think about my, if any of you have a dog, golden retriever, this is my dog, Belle. And if you say squirrel to her, she goes off running. And it's not too, whether there's a squirrel there or not, mind you. And it's not too dissimilar to what we see in the field. Oftentimes, the shiny new program or the great idea we got at a conference, the thing that's the silver bullet, if you will, that we think really make a huge difference. Sometimes we're chasing squirrels and haven't done the due diligence to see where are our actual needs. And so what we do, we actually promote people kind of weeding the garden. In public education, we are so bad about adding one more thing to our plate and never evaluating and taking things off. And, Tony, you and I see teachers with the big rolling carts coming into school every day, and the administrators, the heavy heart because there's so many things that they're being asked to do, and people feel like they're not doing any one thing really well. And so what we've done is we actually promote people doing what we call an implementation audit. Get some things off the plate to really focus your efforts. And there's two simple questions that Tony and I ask, and our colleagues ask folks all the time. Are you really using it? And then is there evidence to show that it really has improved student performance? If you find that you can't answer either of those questions with a yes, then it probably is something that needs to be weeded. This is a very simple protocol that we invite leaders and teachers to engage in, looking at initiatives, programs, processes, practices, anything that you have going on in your school. How is it impacting student achievement on the left? It's from low to high. If it's having a great improvement or impact, is it having a lower impact? And then down across the bottom, what's the degree of implementation? If you have low impact on achievement and low degree of implementation, then it's something that needs to be taken off the plate. And oftentimes it takes away from instructional time and from teacher practice. So this is a great protocol that helps teachers and leaders really focus the work. Tony?
Lissa, with this and with the need assessment that you referenced as we were hosting the polling questions, does that help schools focus? And I mean, can we, if schools need help, can we provide them some assistance in determining what to work on? And I ask because I'm reminded of a pretty dynamic middle school principal with whom I worked up in the Northeast a couple of years ago, and this was a gentleman that was always out front greeting his kids as the day began and walking the halls and had a finger on the pulse of his school. And I remember walking into his building one day because I was there to coach the instructional data teams in his building, and the principal, rather than being out front, was in his office. He was sitting at his desk, and he had his head in his hands, and so this was pretty unusual. And I stopped and asked him, "Hey, what's going on? What's the problem?" And he pointed to 7 stacks of paper on his desk, and he said, "This one is your recommendations from last time. This is what you said I ought to do." He said, "This is from the Cambridge Review. This is from the state. This is from my district." He said, "Tell me which of these 7 stacks of paper I should follow." Can we help schools and districts determine which thing to work on?
Yes, and that is not. I mean, that is a typical response from leaders. They really are, again, heavy heart, head in their hands. What do I do first? And so these kinds of protocols and this comprehensive needs assessment, and then to be quite honest, the 9 foundational practices help people focus in on what's most important and eliminate the other outside barriers that continue to draw them away from what's most important. Going through these protocols, sitting down, writing a very focused improvement plan where there truly are a focused improvement, like Mike Schmoker and others have said for years, really limited number of goals. If you have a school improvement plan, which we see all the time, where districts and schools are fighting with the school improvement plans that are 20, 40, 60, sometimes 80 pages long, no faculty member is going to use that to drive their instruction. And so being able to focus on the highest leverage activities that should be replicated and are actually making an improvement in achievement, and then weeding out the things that are not so that we can focus on what's most important. 3 goals, no more than 4 to 5 action steps. Every teacher and faculty member should be able to tell you what their goals are for the year, and that's when you know you're actually going to make some true progress.
All right. So, what are some of the phases or stages that schools go through?
Well, I think that, you know, we're anywhere from schools chasing squirrels to really schools trying to get that laser-like focus. And I think one of our you know, next questions would really be, you know, how would you describe your improvement efforts? Where are you in those phases of transformation? Are you actually in that feeling fragmented and feeling like you don't have that clear focus, where you are inundated with initiatives and practices and trying to juggle? Or have you moved towards that truly laser-like focus where you have that really solid school improvement plan? Because that really does illustrate the phases of transformation, because you want to get that focus so that you can move towards true sustainable results.
And
Kathy?
Lissa, perhaps we can help everybody. Okay, we're voting now. That's great. And does okay, it is launched, and we will give you a few more seconds here.
Perfect. And you can see that it's a range, you know, 1 chasing squirrels to 5 laser-like focus. If you would just share where you think you are in that continuum. Perfect. Several of you are somewhere in the middle.
Okay, we'll close the poll, and we'll share the results.
Great, great.
Almost a bell curve.
Yeah.
Well,
Very good.
and so that leads to the next set of questions we've gotten from the field, Lissa. And you know, how quickly can schools realize some gains by focusing on these foundational practices? What have you seen in the field working with some of our clients?
Okay, it's a great question. I have had the pleasure of working with one of our partner schools. It's Napier Elementary School in Nashville, Tennessee. We actually began work with them in late October. 1st of November was when I joined the school. And I will share that after doing a comprehensive needs assessment, really identifying what their priority areas of focus needed to be, doing training with the staff, we really revamped their intervention program, started data teams, identified those priority learning goals by grade. This staff has done a phenomenal job. They were considered one of Nashville's 10 innovation schools last year, really receiving some additional support through school improvement grants because of their lower performance. This was the only elementary school last year that made progress. And let me tell you about how quickly this can happen. Now, they revamped their intervention and really started by January, and this was around their prioritized learning goals. This is one example. We see this happen across the board K-12 with teams that are focused like this on the right work. 4th grade, they were focused on 2-digit multiplication. This was their pre-assessment. They had only 10% of their kids that were proficient or higher in 4th grade on 2-digit multiplication, which had been taught in 3rd grade. And so they met as a team, they identified consistent instruction strategies, they broke their kids up into groups of students so that they could target the instruction. And these were consensus-driven instructional strategies that all teachers need to teach. This is what happened 2 weeks later based off of their post-assessment. You can see the dramatic growth in just 2 weeks, and they did not even get to meet interventions, you know, daily. So this was pretty big growth that they saw. And to be quite honest with you, they also added in a component of student learning goals. We know from John Hattie's research in visible learning for teachers that the #1 impact on student achievement can be self-reported grades and goal setting. And that could equate to 2 to 3 years of growth. Students actually identifying their own learning goals and marking their progress. What we've seen in this school, Tony, is just a true shift in culture where they were able to see immediate results. The teachers and the students alike then were so motivated by that we're starting to see a real can-do culture, and they have already identified next steps. I was just there a couple weeks ago looking at our priority needs for our second phase of transformation, and I can tell you that this has had huge change and shift in their school based off of just a few months of really focused work. I know you've witnessed the same thing, Tony.
Yeah, this is a great example and hard data from an elementary school, and I'm reflecting back on some middle and high schools through my work that have seen similar gains and transformations, going from one of the lowest achieving in the state to a recognized exemplary campus within 1 to 2 years because they are consistently applying these practices. They're making sure that everybody truly understands it. They're implementing at a point where 90% of the staff can do the practice well. And that's where they've started to see gains, is that with that truly deep implementation.
Right.
High schools, same thing. Big staff, it's a complex undertaking. And so everything that you've said about focus seems to me to be even more important as we go up the K-12 ladder.
Right, and this,
Kathy, and I'm actually just going to interrupt for a moment. Some of the questions that have come in, you have answered as we've gone along, but one by Paulette she says that time for professional development is difficult with the many demands of schools. What are some models of professional development that really work and get results? How much time and what is the focus for PD that works? Which I think is an awesome question to address to both of you.
It is a great question, and thank you for that, Paulette. Tony, do you want to address that first?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and so Paulette, here's one of the ironies. Lissa and I are professional developers, and yet the best professional development actually comes from teachers working with teachers. And where we see real differences, where we come in and work on helping create structures and facilitating processes, but then teachers sitting down together and looking at student work, and figuring out what it is they need to do to help students get better, and if they don't know, then getting assistance. So yeah, Paula, great question. I mean, it needs to happen frequently, but I think especially as we get pressed for time, rethinking what we consider to be professional development it is as important as finding and protecting time.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. We find that many districts are facing budget cuts, furlough days, changes in the number of days in a school calendar. So what we consider traditional seminar-type professional development isn't always possible. And as Tony's illustrated, getting in and working with teams of teachers, to be quite honest with you, the most influential person on a teacher is another teacher. And so having those teams actually grow and learn together has proven to be a phenomenal way of delivering professional development.
And Paulette Paulette confirms this by firstly, thank you, both, and also teachers working with teachers, exclamation point.
Yes.
Just re-emphasizing that. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's kind of scary because, the literature out there suggests that it may be as little as 4% of professional development that actually transfers into classroom practice. What we found in the field is that, in large part, that's due to the fact that for every day of PD, you need 7 days of ongoing modeling, coaching, and feedback. And if we're trying to do too many things in too little time, it's really hard to provide that modeling, that coaching, and feedback that will truly transfer a practice from a teacher learning opportunity into what's going on in their classrooms.
Absolutely.
And folks, please keep your questions coming in and continue the questions offline. We want to honor people's time, and so we're starting to draw to the end of our time together. But Please don't hesitate if you've got some questions you want to fire off to us, send them on in to us now or reach out to Lissa or myself afterwards. We know that 45 minutes is insufficient to give you all the detail that you need regarding these practices. And so if you'd like to find out more, please make a note on your calendar. 2 upcoming events that I referenced at the beginning of our webinar, September 24th and 25th in Chicago, Illinois, November 13th and 14th in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we'll go much deeper on these practices if you'd like to find out more. And certainly on the 13th and 14th if you'd like to hear from Mike Schmoker and Paul Tuff and their findings in highly challenging but highly successful schools across the country. Folks, it's all about creating a culture for success, and so we have a ton of resources and materials that we love to give away for free. Webinars such as this that we've recorded and posted on our resource center. If you want to find out more about our school improvement partnerships or federal guidelines under which you might be operating, we're going to have links to those posted on our website with the download of this webinar as we go through. And we certainly hope to continue the conversation with you. You do not have to have a contract with us to get us to answer questions. So we do not believe in drive-by professional development. So please reach out to any and all of us at any time with your questions, reflections on today's events. And we want to just thank you for joining us today. Continue to send questions in. We'll be online for a little bit actually after we close out. But we'll put up our slide here. Again, we just want to say thanks for joining us. I am Tony Flach, and with me today was Lissa Pijanowski. Dr. Lissa Pijanowski is our Director of National School Improvement Partnerships. You see our contact information there on the screen. If you'd like to find out more about services that we offer that may be helpful to you, please feel free to reach out to Kyle Helfrich. Lissa, I want to thank you for joining us today and for the information that you shared with our folks on the line, and Kathy, thank you for your coordination.
Thank you both. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all for joining us today.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great rest of your week and a wonderful start to your school year. Look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.